Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. So this is Unity, Part 3, Mission, Chapter 29, Marcia. Jack and I were ordered by our doctors to rest as we traveled to Survey Hub. Lucifer concurred. You'll have more than enough time to learn all that you need to know at Survey Hub, and the information will be more accurate than what I have currently. Survey may be able to do miraculous things, but even we can't completely break the laws of time and space. The AI paused for a second. Not for lack of trying, mind. We gave in and explored the areas of the ship that we could, took naps, and talked to each other. Our relationship had deepened since we were stuck in the tube, but I hadn't told him about Bridget or my time on Diana yet. When he asked why I left the party early, I just told him that I was tired from the excitement. He hadn't really asked further. I was grateful for that, since honestly I didn't know what to do about the emotions and memories that Bridget had brought up. Papa was reiterating me too. You need to talk to her. It's the only way you'll start having some closure around Cheryl's death. It's time to stop hiding from the past, priest. I sighed as I continued my daily walk down the main marketplace of Lightbringer. The old man gave me an annoyed grunt, but I ignored him in favor of the marketplace, which was awash with color, people, art, and music. It was as if every day was a carnival here. Lucifer had told me once that he adored the art that humans made because it helps him understand humanity better. Seeing the many types of art that surrounded me, I admired Lucifer's taste. I couldn't help but smile at the brightly colored flags and ribbons that shifted in the breeze from the air handling system. "Marcia?" a voice said behind me. I tensed and stopped walking. It was her. "Marcia, please, can we talk?" I turned around. Bridget was standing in front of me, another woman standing next to her. I let out the breath that I'd been holding and realized that I couldn't get out of it this time. "Yeah, sure, where?" I said. I sounded more irritable than I wanted to. "There's a coffee house a couple doors down. I'm a regular there." She pointed in the direction I'd been walking. Her friend touched her shoulder. "Oh, and this is Sasha, my partner," she said, and signed, belatedly introducing the woman. Sasha was almost the opposite of Bridget, much shorter, with dark skin and eyes. Sasha looked me squarely in the eyes. Her challenge made me blink. She gave off an air of fierce protectiveness, and I could feel that she wasn't sure about me. "Hello," I said, rattled enough to forget to also sign it. Sasha signed to Bridget, and the other woman nodded and signed back. I had to admit that my sign language wasn't very good, so I couldn't follow at speed. I signed an apology when they looked back at me. "Surprise," Sasha signed. "Don't worry about it," as Bridget translated. She then turned back to Bridget and started signing again. I looked away out of politeness. "Yes, I know," Bridget said. "I'll talk to you later, love." She gave the other woman a kiss on the top of her head. Sasha looked at me one more time, then left. The taller woman stared after her, smiling. I remembered how that felt long ago and far away. I shook off the memory. I felt disapproval from Papa for pushing it away again, but I continued to ignore him. Bridget turned and motioned to the cafe. "Sorry about Sasha. I told her about what happened on Diana when we first got together. She's a little bit protective of me when I meet anyone from Unity. Thankfully, folks from Diana rarely come through Survey territory." "Yes, I suppose they wouldn't," I replied. "Goddess, can you imagine the conniptions that some of those bitches would have if they saw Hef?" She giggled. I couldn't help but laugh, a little shrilly, because she was absolutely right. We entered the shop, and Bridget waved to the person at the counter, holding up 2 fingers. They nodded and started grinding coffee, before we even sat down. I took a deep breath, and the smell of the coffee helped settle my nerves. "So," I started, but then couldn't seem to say anything more. Bridget raised her hand. "No, please, let me just get it out." The server brought our coffees. When we were alone again, she continued, I don't blame you for what happened. She paused. Your sister was like a mom to me, and she loved me more than my blood moms did. But She held up her hand again. No, you were as much of a victim of Tracy as we were. I found out what happened after she hung Cheryl. A body hanging from a tree, swinging in a moonlit breeze. The body turned, and the familiar face looked back at her with sightless eyes. She could hear the other women on horses behind her, jeering and laughing, calling the body a tranny lover and describing what they'll do when they find the boy. Flames of rage built inside her, brighter than the sun. The realization that she had been used, had been betrayed, gave her a clarity of purpose. She lifted the crossbow, aimed, and fired, and fired, and fired, and... Oh, gods, I said, and put my head in my hands and began to quietly sob. How can you not blame me? I was the one that put you and Cheryl in danger. I should have seen what was happening. I should have... Bridget had come over to kneel by my chair. She didn't say anything, but wrapped her arms around me and held me tight. I forgave you a long time ago, Marcia, she said into my hair. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Bridget. I'm giving it to you anyway, she replied. She pulled back from the hug and sat back in her chair. Handing me a napkin to wipe my eyes, she said, I was mad at you for a long time, but when I went back after Unity cleaned house, my aunt told me what really happened. Besides, when the Unity folks said they had agents on the planet and then you suddenly disappeared, well, it wasn't hard to put it all together. I felt small and empty, as if I'd been beaten and hollowed out. I'm so sorry, Bridget, for everything. I was so horrible to you, to Cheryl. I paused. I know my apology isn't enough. I appreciate the apology, Marcia, but like I said, I forgave you a long time ago, especially now seeing your reaction. She paused for a moment and took a sip of coffee. Are you really going to take down these crazy new harmonists? I opened my mouth, then shut it. How did you hear about that? Small ship, she grinned. Also, I'm a volunteer EMT, and I had to drag victims out from the bombed-out section. Oh, I said. I'm doing part of the job, but I can't really say much more. The other woman nodded. I know. Lucifer told me not to ask for details. They're really protective of you, you know. They are? I'm not sure why, but all the AIs take care of their own, especially if they think someone is special in some way. How they determine that, I have no idea. I've been with Survey for a long time now, and the AIs are still a mystery to me. They don't always understand humans, but they seem to have a sense about us that we can't see for ourselves. I nodded. It seems they're able to see patterns in ways we don't. She made a sound of agreement. I finally took a sip of my now cold coffee. We sat for a while in silence. I didn't know what else I could say. There was so much history between us and so many memories flooding my mind that I felt like whatever I said would just be a jumble of nonsense. I ran my hands through my hair and looked up at her. Thank you, I finally said. Seemed like the only thing I could say. Bridget stood up. You're welcome. If you ever want to talk more, let me know. She moved towards the door, then stopped and hugged me again. Take care of yourself, Marcia. And she walked out of the shop. I stared at my now empty coffee cup and really wanted something much stronger than coffee. Go home, child, Papa said. This time I listened to him. I sat in the dark of my suite on Lightbringer, staring at the liter bottle of flat space ale and holding a glass. All I could think was that I didn't deserve the forgiveness that Bridget had given me. I deserved her anger and her hatred. Why didn't she yell at me? I thought. I turned the glass in my hand. A rational part of my brain knew what would happen if I opened the bottle, but these weren't rational times. Papa was, thankfully, not sticking his nose in, and I was okay with that. I pulled the bottle closer to me and opened it. Before I could pour, the door opened and there was a person silhouetted in the doorway. I said no visitors, Lucifer. They didn't answer. The person moved forward into the room and the door closed. Huh. Looks like Lucifer was right, Jack said. Right about what? I grumbled. That you needed me. He walked over to the table. I poured the drink anyway, but just held the glass and stared at the liquid inside. Jack sat across from me, searching my face in the dim light of the wall panels. Yep, they were quite right. What do you mean they were quite right? I said, my voice sounding unnecessarily angry even to me. Shit, I'm sorry, Jack, I said quietly. Jack took the glass and the bottle. Why don't I put this away and then you can talk to me, okay? I nodded and let go of the bottle and glass. He stood up, put the drink somewhere, and turned on a small light. I heard some shuffling around the drink and food printers, and after a few minutes, Jack came back with some tea and cookies. Someone gave me this tea once. I hear it's highly effective. He put the mug in front of me, and I could smell the herbs, recognizing the tea that I first gave Jack on station. I started to cry. I don't deserve this kindness, I thought. Yes, you do deserve kindness, Marcia. We're family now. We don't know everything about each other yet, but I know that you've been around the block more than a few times, so have I. You've seen me at my worst. Hell, we almost died together. You could trust me, Marcia. I didn't think I'd said that out loud. You didn't have to. I looked askance at him. He shrugged. One of my dads is an alcoholic. I know that look. And what look is that? The look of someone about to crawl into the bottle because life just got too hard. What, are you telepathic now too? I asked, then thought better of it. No, wait, don't answer that. He smiled. I took a sip of the tea, though I kept looking for the bottle for later reference. It wasn't near the food dispenser, and I decided that it was probably for the best. I put the mug down and put my head in my hands. Damn it, Jack, why did she have to be here? Who? I took a deep breath, put my hands down, and then started talking. You know now I worked for UI for my first career. I was pretty young when they recruited me. Straight out of college, actually. Not too long after, they also recruited my younger sister. Her name was Cheryl. I paused and grabbed the mug again. I needed something to hold on to. UI likes to recruit within families for special projects, especially if the siblings have a really good relationship. Why? Jack asked. Because when you go undercover, you need someone you can trust. Seriously? They sent you undercover? I nodded. Not just undercover, but as an illegal in a lost colony. I realized Jack might not know what that meant, so I added, an illegal is an old Earth spy term meaning someone who goes in to another society and is trained so that they fit right in with the culture. You show up with all the right papers, know how to say all the right fucking things. I trailed off. You made it, sisters! Marcia squinted in the sunshine, too bright after the darkness of the shuttle that had brought her and Cheryl to the surface. There was bright color everywhere she looked, on people's clothing and the walls of the buildings, which were covered with murals and women in different trades and scenes. She assumed were from the history of Diana's landfall. Cheryl followed Marcia out of the shuttle and gasped at the sight. Wow, Rebecca was right. The trio of women who had greeted them were smiling. Well, said the tall woman in front with short hair, we welcome you to Diana. Rebecca spoke very highly of you and told us that you'll fit right in. I hope that's true. Shall we get you settled in, then? Tracy, you haven't even introduced us yet, one of the other women scolded. Tracy put her palm to her head. Oh, where are my manners? Hi, I'm Tracy, the matriarch of Diana. She put out her hand, and Marcia took it. The touch was soft and warm, and Marcia found herself getting lost in Tracy's dark eyes. Hello, Marcia stammered. Cheryl punched her shoulder. Come on, sis, I got to say hello, too. Marcia broke out of the spell as Tracy took Cheryl's hand. These other two here, the council historian, Joanne, and my co-matriarch, Kathy. Joanne, a small woman with long blonde hair, eagerly shook Marcia's hand. Oh, it's going to be so wonderful to have another historian here. And Earth history, too. I'm so excited to be working with you. Marcia smiled at the older woman and said, If you don't mind slogging through hundreds of years of misogyny to get the work done, right? The two women laughed. Oh, we'll get along fine. Come see me in the council house after breakfast tomorrow. With that, Joanne walked away. Marcia didn't know what to do then, as she waited awkwardly. Tracy gave a little cough. Well, now that that's out of the way, Kathy, why don't you show them to their cottage and help them get settled in? Oh, and it's Freya's day, which means there's dinner in the community halls tonight. Kathy will show you the community hall for your cluster. The woman looked pointedly at Marcia and smiled. I hope to see you there. Tracy walked in the same direction as Joanne, leaving her and Cheryl with Kathy, who seemed to have a perpetual frown on her face. The woman motioned them to follow, saying, Come on, transport's this way. They picked up their bags and followed. Marcia? Yes. Where did you just go now? I stood up and started pacing. We were undercover on a planet called Diana. It was a lost colony from Earth, from the early days of colonization. It was founded by a group of women who wanted to make a female utopia. They did take some men along, typically queer men who sympathized with their society, but after a few years they took over their station and forced the men who resided on the station to leave. Women were given the option to stay. The leaders of Diana decided that they would only allow female immigrants, so as their society grew, the men became nothing more than breeding stock and drudges. Boys would be educated until they were 12 and handed over to the men to learn a trade or become servants. Once Unity became stable, UI started looking for the lost colonies. Diana was the first one they found. There would occasionally be refugees from Diana, mostly children whose mothers would sneak them out on a trade transport. Most of the refugees were male, transgender, or intersex, and they told some pretty horrific stories about the treatment of transgender people. So they sent us in to investigate. I sat down again. My tea had grown cold. Without a word, Jack took the tea away and brought back a glass of water, which I gulped down. Jack refilled the glass and set it in front of me again. I take it the reports were true? He asked. I nodded. It wasn't overt. It took a long time to finally get proof. I was sent to infiltrate the local government. My sister was supposed to work in the community and find out the feelings of the general population. Since I was a scholar, I was allowed regular monitored contact with Unity so I could get more of the histories. That was how UI kept in contact with us. 10 years we stayed there gathering information, but I didn't find real proof. Cheryl settled down with a woman who worked in the medical field, and I worked with the historian. I winced at the word. It was Cheryl and her partner who were seeing the real evidence. Intersex babies given immediate surgeries to be female. Women who would figure out their male-at-birth child was transgender, and that they'd pass off as girls or send the trans boys to the men to be raised by them. There was even a black market of puberty blockers so that trans children could stay with their mothers until they could arrange for them to be sent away. I took a sip of my water, steeling myself for the rest of the story. Cheryl saw all of this, and I didn't believe her. I got so involved in the workings of the government and their beliefs that I told her she was crazy. I puffed myself up in a caricature. There's no way these noble women would do something so horrible, I would tell her. I gave a hysterical laugh. I was so full of shit. And I was blinded by love. You were in love with someone high up in the government? Jack asked. Not just someone. Their leader, the matriarch. Jack gave a low whistle. Shit. He shook his head. So, what happened since you're obviously here and not still there? My body went numb. Tell this story, child. You need to tell this story to someone, Papa said. I sighed. Cheryl and her wife were running the part of the underground that sent children off-world. They had adopted a trans girl, and her wife got caught making puberty blockers in a lab used by the underground. Their daughter, Bridget, was 14 when it happened. I met her a few times, and I didn't know she was trans until the night Cheryl's wife was caught. Cheryl came over to tell me, and I exploded at her, saying that she was betraying the colony and so many other horrible things. The tears were flowing freely now. I could remember the look on her face at the vile things I had said. I could see her face as she said the last words she would ever say to me. I don't know who you are anymore, Marcia. They followed her from my apartment, and when they ran, the matriarch council hunted them all down. Hunted them down like they were animals. I knew something was wrong when Tracy said they were having a hunting party right after my sister disappeared. I followed them that night and found all the women who had gone with the leader laughing and making jokes about something hanging from a tree. What was hanging on the tree, Marcia? Jack asked quietly. I could barely speak the words. It was my sister. The bitches hung her just because she didn't hate transgender girls. My breathing was heavy. But they didn't get away with it. See, no one goes unarmed on Diana. There are a lot of predatory species in the forest areas. I was particularly good with the crossbow. The bitch who had touched me as a lover was laughing at the body of my dead sister hanging on a tree. She told me that Cheryl deserved it, that Tracy and all her cronies just sitting on their horses and laughing like it was some sort of party. I said the last through clenched teeth. The anger, all of it, flooded me again. Something broke inside her. She lifted the crossbow. I killed them all, Jack. The whole hunting party. I toppled their government in one night, I said quietly. We sat in silence for a while. Finally, Jack spoke. How did you get off Diana? I wiped my eyes on my sleeves. I don't know. I think Unity came for me. I know I was in a mental institution when they came. I didn't care anymore. They brought me back to my family on Earth, but I wasn't allowed to tell them what happened. My family disowned me because of it. They still don't talk to me except for my niece. I left Earth and traveled around for a while. Fell into the bottle until I sort of found Papa Legba, or rather, he found me. I didn't have to worry about money, you see. Since UI had me on a long-term leave, I was well paid for my murder. Jack looked thoughtful. Was it really murder, though? I mean, you were enraged and you had just found out everything you were told was a lie. I may have done the same if it were me. I'm not a warrior, Jack. You were at that moment. You were when you needed to be. Do you think that warriors really like killing? It's something I'm really good at, and I could do it when necessary, but taking a life is not something I do lightly. But I should have seen what was going on. That's what I was there to do. I should have listened to my intuition, or at least my sister. I stood up. I should have died that night with her. I screamed. Jack stood and came round to where I was standing. He didn't say anything, but just wrapped his arms around me. The feeling of unconditional love seemed to release something in me, and I began to sob. My body went limp, but instead of letting me fall, Jack brought us both gently to the floor. I didn't know how long he stayed there and held me, with no words, no judgment, just love. When I quieted down, Jack held me back up. He pulled his chair closer to me and sat down. So it was Bridget you talked to today, then? I nodded. What'd she say? She forgave me. I don't deserve it, but she forgave me. He took my hand. Take it for what it is, Marcia. You may not feel you deserve it, but she obviously thought you did. You did what you had to do. I shook my head. I don't know. What's the status of the colony now? He asked. They're no longer a lost colony, and they're on track to becoming a unity colony. Jack raised his eyebrows as if to say, see? I shook my head again. You were in the right place at the right time, Jack said. But it didn't totally sound like him. I looked into his eyes and saw other eyes staring back at me. There are always too many who die in war. It wasn't a war, I said. Jack and the Morgan both looked at me with a knowing smile. Stay, please. I don't want to be alone tonight, I asked. Of course, Jack said, as he stood and cleared the cups from the table. He came back and held out his hand, leading me to my bed and tucking me in like a child. He sat on the side of the bed, and we held hands for a while in silence. You know, I think I understand now why you wanted to protect Jenny and make sure she's taken care of. I nodded, sleep already trying to overcome me. We can't let her die, Jack. Not there. We can't let her lose herself. She won't be the same when she comes back. I know, Jack said, and as I drifted off to sleep, he said, I promise, we'll bring her home. Chapter 30. Jenny. I threw the hairbrush across the room. Mistress! I frowned. Please stop calling me mistress. How do you stand this? Beth sighed. Mistress, she said, with emphasis, if you're going to accomplish your mission, you'll have to deal with me calling you mistress for a lot longer than a month. I know it's not pleasant, and thankfully Lord Marston is part of the underground, but even he has to keep up appearances. Better for folks around here to think him soft-hearted in his old age than heretical. The city is going to be much harder, and you're going to see even more that will anger you. If you don't do as I and Lord Marston say, you'll be dead, or worse, within days of reaching the capital. She sighed and went to pick up the errant brush, giving me a stern look as I stood up to pick it up for myself. I sighed and sat back down in front of the mirror. Fine, okay, you're right, I said sheepishly. Sorry for throwing the brush. The other woman frowned. Thank you. I'll accept your apology this time, but from now on, don't apologize to me again. If someone hears you, I'll be dead. Beth nodded. Or worse. There's no such thing as privacy in the capital. All your neighbors will be watching you and waiting to report any transgressions to the nearest clergy they can find. Since nearly all the men of your caste are some form of clergy, it won't be hard for them to report you. She began to brush my hair while she talked. How does Marston get away with it? Lord Marston? Yes, right, I said. So? Lord Marston is very good at playing the pious, doddering old widower. He's also a gun dealer specializing in antiques. He's made enough money to live quite comfortably in his retirement, but sometimes makes a sale from his private collection when the underground needs supplies. He'll let some of the less shrewd merchants cheat him royally so that he has a reputation for being slightly senile. That also lets him act more kindly towards us. Sweet old man living out his last years and all that. He acts like he's in his cups at parties, then makes like he's fallen asleep. It's a lot of good information that way. He also rarely goes to the capital these days, and the only folks who'd remember him well are all on the ruling council now and don't care about a retired old fool. Doesn't the Book of Owen say to care for the elderly? I asked. Beth snorted. The Book of Owen says a lot of things. I gave her a grin in the mirror. Right. The woman resumed brushing my hair, and I stared at her. She was quite beautiful, even in the utilitarian gray dress of the slave class. It made me wonder how much she'd been through to talk about death so calmly. It was then that I remembered what she had said. Hey, wait a minute. What do you mean by worse than death? Beth stopped mid-brush and put her hands to her sides. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. His lordship told me not to discuss it with you, she finally said, unless you decide not to go through with the mission. The rage I had felt earlier returned in a rush. He what? Beth visibly shrank into herself, and I stopped short. I took a deep breath and said in a much calmer voice, Beth, I'm not mad at you. I'm just angry at this whole planet in general and how it treats people as cattle and its women like baby factories. I really don't care what his lordship told you not to tell me. I need to know everything. So if the worst does happen, I'll at least have some idea what I'm up against. Mark and I are here because we have specific skills to carry out the mission, but we're not professional spies. We're soldiers, and we can and will make mistakes. There's even a chance we won't succeed in this insanity, or one or both of us will die in the attempt. So please, Beth, I need to know. The other woman kept her eyes down, shuffling her feet. Eventually, she came to a decision and quietly started talking, keeping an eye on the door. Men of the upper classes get exiled, like your husband was, if they are deviant. Women will sometimes be killed, but it's more likely they will be sent to the convent to relearn proper feminine behavior. It depends on their family. I'm not sure exactly what they do in the convent, but women who come out of there aren't right anymore. One of my friend's mistresses got caught sleeping with a female slave. She had a very strong personality and ran her household very strictly. When she came out of the convent, she would only speak when spoken to and could barely manage her household anymore. They ended up hiring a housekeeper to do the tasks that she had done before. She eventually died when she birthed her 9th child. Like I said, I don't know exactly what happens to them in the convent, but they come out like ghosts. I could see my eyes widen in the mirror. What about the working class women? I asked quietly. Free women who live in the dormitories, and any special friendships that happen amongst them tend to be ignored. Once they get married, though, and are no longer working, it's the same for them as the upper class women. The underground gets a lot of working class women filling its ranks. Beth went back to brushing my hair. I watched her in the mirror as she kept her eyes down. I could feel her nervousness at defying orders, and it made me angry. This whole world made me angry, and it was difficult for me to play this upper-class princess bullshit while just seeing just how bad things were here. It was worse to know that everything depended on me being meek and submissive, at least in public. It was hard enough during our sessions on Musashi, but on the ship, New Harmony had still been abstract. Now I was beginning to understand why Mark had been freaking out. The reality was much worse than anything Brother Daniel told us. As Beth continued to silently style my pale hair into a braided bun, I couldn't help but feel that I was falling backwards into another bodily prison. All the anxiety and tension that I thought I had left behind on New York Colony started to creep slowly up my spine. Julian! Julian looked in the mirror. The suit was expensive and tailored just like their father's, but the image staring back at them wasn't right. It was all a sham. The suits, polo shirts, bachelor parties, all of it. Their life was a series of lies. How long can I keep this up, they thought. Julian, there you are. Come, let me look at you, their mother said from the doorway. They dutifully turned towards the door and let her fix their tie. Ah, there's my handsome boy. It should be a profitable party tonight, don't you think? She asked. They took a deep breath. Sure, as long as father doesn't throw all the eligible women at me all night like he did last time. Oh, come now. He just has your best interest at heart. Julian laughed. You can't be serious. All he cares about is making some sort of alliance marriage to increase our profit margin. The only interest he has in me is the collection of interest. The older woman frowned. Now, Julian. They held up their hand. Forget it, Mother. I'll be down in a minute, okay? The mother stared at Julian for a long time, as if she were trying to see something that Julian knew wasn't there, then turned and left. I looked in the mirror again. The image was still wrong, but there was no way to fix it. They wiped away the tears from their eyes, straightened the tuxedo jacket, took a breath, and left the room to face whatever fresh horrors their father had in store for them. Mistress? I blinked the memory away, looking at myself in the mirror. My hair was perfectly arranged and simple to match the plain dark green dress. Unlike Beth's dress, mine was fitted well enough to my body. It had dark wood buttons down the front, all the way from the hem to the neck, and the skirt came to just above my ankles. I was a tall picture of the modest, new Harmonian upper-class woman. Mistress, are you all right? Yes, just thinking. Thank you. My hair looks fine, I said, distracted by the memory. Beth smiled and went to put away the styling tools. I stood up and went to the full-length mirror to get a good look at myself. I turned, admiring the image that was before me. It made me look much more feminine than the standard Unity or Survey issue uniforms. I smiled and twirled around a bit, until I heard a slight giggle behind me. Mistress, you look like a little girl with her first dress. Startled by the observation, I stopped. My cheeks grew hot. I stared again into the mirror and my smile went away. I never got to be a little girl, I said. Beth shook her head. I'm sorry, she whispered, then said, I don't want to know any more about your life off-world, mistress. It's too dangerous. Yes, it is, I said. I suppose we should go downstairs for breakfast. Yes, mistress. I nodded, not looking in the mirror again as I walked past it and out the door. Breakfast was in a formal dining room, which was elegant and richly decorated, but still somewhat plain. It really did feel like something out of Earth's ancient past. I'd seen vids of old dramas set in those time periods, but to see a functioning society still living a facsimile of the past like that just seemed weird. Lord Marsden was at the head of the table, with Mark on his right side. I took my seat on the left-hand side and a little further down the table. Even when Mark and I went to live in the capital, I would still sit in this position, as males of the family and male guests would always have prominence. The gender performance on this world rankled. I was a soldier. I had taken down a whole family of mobsters. I could hack into any computer system and not be detected. I won awards for martial arts in the academy. I jumped out of a demon into atmosphere, and now? Now I was reduced to nothing but a bauble on Mark's arm. The men stood when I walked in, and I heard Beth clear her throat slightly. I slowed down and took my place at the table, sitting when the men sat. Good morning, Lady Jennifer, said Lord Marsden. Good morning, my wife, said Mark, with a slightly worried look on his face. Good morning, sirs, I replied, but not without a hint of frustration. The Lord frowned slightly, then signaled the butler to serve breakfast. You really must learn to carry yourself better, Jennifer, or it won't be worth doing this at all. I'm trying, I replied. It's just, I don't know, complicated. Lord Marsden looked confused, but Mark nodded. It was much harder than I could have imagined. My confidence was fading now that we were here, and the urge to bolt was strong. Beth gave me a sympathetic look and said, It has only been a couple of weeks, sir. She's trying to learn what other ladies learn from the cradle. Well, yes, that's true, he said. Rome wasn't built in a day, I suppose. I cringed at his dismissive tone. I was disappointing him, and it terrified me. I tried to sit a little more meekly, eyes down, and said a little prayer of thanks to whoever was listening that it was breakfast and I didn't have to remember which fork to use. Lord Marsden gave me a gentle smile. Well, if we modify your story a little and make you the orphan daughter of a minor country lord, then some of your eccentricities can be forgiven. Even here, like the fatherland, there's a difference between country and city folk. Yes, sir, I said. Now, Mark, we'll need to go over the guns once again, and the expected profit margins for antiques. Lord Jameson will expect you to know your guns and will be much happier if you also knew more about the dealer's market going in. We'll go over that today. Jameson is a prickly man, and if you can't show your worth to him, he'll boot you right out of the firm. Marsden paused. You'll need to invite him over for dinner about 2 weeks after you start work. This is essential if you want to move into the higher echelons of the merchant caste. It wouldn't hurt to invite your local pastor, too, to really solidify your cover. Mark was wide-eyed, but only nodded and said, Yes, sir. It seems that things have gotten even more strict since I was exiled. The older man sighed. Yes, in the last 10 years, especially in the cities. The Anointed's ruling council realized that they were losing too many of their own to exile and decided that none of us were being godly enough. They're more apt to come down hard with the Book of Owen instead of the Bible. And we all know how much stricter the Book of Owen is about how people are supposed to act. He shook his head. I've heard the original settlers were worse, especially when subduing the slave population. I swallowed a comment and let the two men continue talking about their day. I couldn't imagine anything worse than this planet's society with all its religious strictures and slavery. I wasn't naive enough to think that humans couldn't be cruel to each other. I'd seen it all the time in my father's house, but at least in Unity there was hope of moving on to something better. In this place, you are what you are until you die, unless you did something wrong. I shivered slightly, then just focused on eating my breakfast. It was, after all, supposed to be a piece of furniture, only to speak when spoken to. It made me so angry it was getting hard to really hide it. The room started to feel too closed in, too warm, even though it was a cold day. Ignoring the food on my plate, I looked out over the gardens that stretched out to the farmland in the distance. What the hell was I doing? Why did I agree to this? What did I owe anyone for this? I needed to get out, or at least out of this room. I stood up. Excuse me, I said, and walked out. The air was cold, as it was mid-fall in this hemisphere of New Harmony. The light was much dimmer here than on most of the Unity worlds I'd been to, so it seemed much colder and darker than it really was. Or maybe that was just the feeling of being trapped here? I left the house gardens and started running past the fields and towards the woods. Mistress! Beth called from the house. I ignored her and kept going. Soon her yells were distant. I kept running, even though I didn't really have anywhere to go. It just felt good to be doing something normal, instead of being a pretty doll in a pretty house. I ran right through the tree line into the blue-green light of the forest. I didn't look where I was going, but luckily the forest floor wasn't very crowded with shrubs. Eventually my legs started screaming at me, and I stopped. I kicked at the rocks and screamed, letting out the frustrations of the last couple of weeks. I wanted to rip the clothes off my body, but common sense finally took over, and I stood breathing hard. Fuck! I shouted to the trees, startling some small animal. What the fuck am I doing on this godforsaken planet? Things had happened so fast on Lightbringer that I wasn't really sure why I agreed to Lucifer's plan. Why'd that bastard want me on this mission in the first place? I sat down on the ground with a thud, putting my head in my hands. Why did I agree to this mission? Was it for revenge? That idiot Morgan was already dead, and the creepy psychiatrist who assaulted Marcia went with him. So it wasn't that. No, I came because of Mark, I said out loud. You came for me? Mark asked. I jumped. How? I followed the screaming, and the frightened squirrels. I gave a laugh at that, especially since what they called squirrels on New Harmony were actually a nut-eating marsupial about the size of a small dog. Mostly cute, unless they decided your hair was good for nest building. I shook my head at the random thought. You didn't have to follow me, I said. He sat down in front of me. Yes, I did. He held out his hand and I took it. We sat like that for a long time, just being together. I realized how little privacy we'd had over the last 2 weeks. The tears surprised me at first when I felt them roll down my cheeks, and then, as if that gave me permission, I started sobbing. Mark pulled me into his arms, and I let him. When I finally sobbed myself out, he said, "I'm glad you came here for me, but you're not just here for me. I know you. You're here for justice. You've met enough new harmonists to know just how bad it is here. Now that you've seen it firsthand, the warrior in you wants to fix it. And our mission is a chance to change an entire world. How many people can say that they have that opportunity?" I nodded. I thought I was the one that was supposed to be consoling you. Mark laughed. Nah. I know this place, and I know how much it hurts to be here. I'm still scared, but now that we're here, I want to get this done so we can leave. And we can figure out where we want to get married in Unity. Maybe somewhere nice and tropical? That would be nice. I heard Turtle Colony has some nice beachside resorts. Turtle Colony? I've never been there. Neither have I, but it's far away from here. He hugged me, and I could feel him nodding against my head. Sounds good, then. He paused. We'll be fine, love. We'll get through this, then we'll go home. I sighed into his embrace, trying to let his words sink into my body. Unfortunately, Mark's reassurances didn't seem to touch the knot of fear in my gut. Chapter 31. Marcia. The room was small for a survey meeting room, but cavernous compared to Unity station rooms. It was quite comfortable, which made it hard to believe that we were still on a space station. The room had windows which overlooked a beautiful garden with a gazebo. Even at Unity's most luxurious, you still felt like you were on a space station. The room's single long table had a screen attached at one end, and there were already several people seated around it. Jack and I waved at Lucifer's captain, then Jack took a seat facing the door. I sat next to him. The screen at the end of the table lit up as the last of the seats were filled. An androgynous face appeared, which I assumed was the first avatar. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Please wait for security measures. Also remember that what is said in this room is not to be discussed with anyone outside it, unless authorized. The first pause as an irritating, low-pitched hum sounded through the room. Blinds came down over the windows, and mechanisms in the door clicked shut. The humming finally stopped, to my relief. Room is secure, and the door is locked. Jack looked at me, and I shrugged. Common practice for high-security meetings, I said. He nodded. Greetings. As you can see, we have 2 newcomers today. I'd like to introduce Reverend Marcia Brooks, who has agreed to be our new ambassador to Unity Hub, and her bodyguard, Jack Kirby, recently retired from Unity Fleet Service. Jack, Marcia, I will let the others introduce themselves during this briefing. We just don't have time for the formalities now that the operation has begun. Jack and I stood up and bowed, then sat back down again. Most nodded in greeting, although some stayed focused on the first. The AI continued. As you all know, we have been watching the lost colony of New Harmony since they started sending their loyal sons about 100 years ago. Earth Reckoning. Just over 3 weeks ago, Lightbringer was bombed by the New Harmony loyal sons while rendering aid to a Unity station with a failed pre-colony mission. With consultation from Musashi and Sun Tzu, we have started our operation to subdue the New Harmony threat. Vice Admiral? A muscular older woman stood up. Vice Admiral Lucia of the Musashi, she said, for our benefit. The Admiral is en route with Musashi to New Harmony. Our assets will make planetfall in just over 5 months. After they're dropped off, Musashi will proceed with the other aspects of that mission. This is incredibly risky, as it is very possible our agents will fail, making it harder to bring aid in the fallout. Musashi is now running radio silent until the mission is complete. And what exactly is the mission on planet? Asked a person from the other end of the table. The first answered, We are restricting that information for the time being. We do not want to risk leaks. It would be a lethal threat to the mission if that information got out. While it is nearly impossible for our upper ranks to have New Harmony spies, we think that our lower ranks may have been infiltrated. Sun Tzu is working on exposing them. I could recognize the other members of the group who understood intelligence work by the grave look on their faces. I was still curious about the details. Given who Jenny was, I worried that she wouldn't be coming back at all. I could feel Jack shifting anxiously next to me, and I patted his arm and said a small prayer. "Please continue, Vice Admiral," said the first. "The second part of the plan involves our new ambassador to Unity. Marcia and Jack are tasked to investigate just how far the New Harmony corruption goes. We're hearing rumors that it may be as high as the Unity president, but we have no direct proof. Sun Tzu might have more current information, but it's been difficult to infiltrate Unity Hub." Another person stood. "Not much more information, unfortunately. These people are good at finding ways to cover their tracks. Some of our agents have ended up missing or dead. Ambassador, given your ties to UI, Control is hoping you'll be able to convince someone in UI that they have a mole problem. We think it goes pretty high because of the more conservative legislation moving through the Unity Senate in the last 10 years. The other issue is that there have been unexplained disappearances at Unity Hub, particularly lower-level workers of color and of New Harmony exiles who were waiting for papers at Hub before moving on to one of the colonies. UI has been alerted by us, but have not responded." I was shocked. "What? That's completely unlike them." "That's our assessment too, Reverend," they said. "We're worried that the new director of UI is either a new harmonist or was recruited by them at Unity Hub. The previous director and deputy were killed in a shuttle accident about a year ago, but we have no proof that it was anything other than an accident. We also have intercepted coded messages, but we've only been able to partially decipher them. The only thing we seem to have in our favor at the moment is that they don't know about the bombing on Lightbringer yet." "It will get to them soon, though," I added. "There are plenty of staff from A4413 that are on their way to Unity Space and should be arriving at Fleet Headquarters by now. Not to mention that we know that there are loyal sons in the military." "Which means our time is growing short," said first. They addressed the Sun Tzu operative. "John, please ensure that Reverend Brooks has someone to train her and Mr. Kirby in survey law and assign them a secretary from your ranks. Admiral, what is our deadline?" "If the drop goes successfully and on time, 17 months, she said. "Understood. Anything else?" asked first. A man raised his hands. "Yes. Why are the rest of the council here if this is some secret mission? Especially if you won't tell us what that mission is? We are the Survey Council, are we not?" The avatar of the first frowned, looking at the man. "Chief Dennings, you are the captain of Secundus, one of the original siblings, and so a member of this council. We are telling you of this operation out of courtesy, as we are planning to upset the governments of 2 sovereign nations for the sake of humanity. You understand as well as anyone else what the laws are. If you have trouble understanding these aspects of being a captain, then I will have Secundus replace you." The delivery of the scolding was matter of fact, but the silence at the table was absolute. It was as close to anger that I had ever seen on an AI show. Instead of saying anything in rebuttal, the chief flushed and sat back down. Jack looked at me, eyes wide. I was just as surprised, and so were many of the others at table. John, however, was barely concealing a grin, which made me wonder how much they knew about Dennings. "If that is all, this meeting is concluded," said the first. "John, Reverend Brooks, and Mr. Kirby, please stay." The first opened the room, and the others left in ones and twos, with Chief Dennings the first at the door. "That might not have been wise, first," said John when the door closed again, his smile gone. "Dennings is a hothead. Why Secundus chose him as chief, I'll never understand." "Unfortunately, he's the best jump drive engineer Secundus has. While jump drive engineers tend to be rather passionate, they do get the job done. I will talk with Secundus." John nodded, then turned to me and Jack. "So, you two have quite the job ahead of you," they said, addressing us. "We've held you back to give you some of the specifics of Jenny and Mark's mission. They will be brought to New Harmony, where they will integrate themselves into their society and, at the appointed time, disrupt the current government by any means possible. Masashi also has a plan to disrupt the planet's technological infrastructure, which will destabilize the government regardless of whether Jenny and Mark succeed." "Isn't that a bit extreme? Is it really necessary to condemn the whole planet when it's just their leaders that have done this?" I asked. "Not when it's riding Not when it's ridding a planet of a racist fascist regime that enslaves other humans, John said. If the leaders of the colony aren't brought down, this will also... If the leaders of the colony aren't brought down, this will also destroy unity, even if you rout out the loyal sons in the government here. There was an insurrection on New Harmony 100 Unity years ago, but the New Harmonist fascists brought it down violently, killing nearly 3 million slaves. This time we are supporting the underground with weapons, but without destroying the ruling council, who are particularly considered next to divinity, they will not be successful. Jack nodded with a faraway look that said he was listening to the Morgan. Kill a few to save the many, he mumbled. He's right, child. They might even be worse than those who enslaved your ancestors, Papa said. All right. The pacifist priest in me doesn't like it, but the practical intelligence agent understands. I paused. Will Jenny and Mark be taken care of when they come back? This will be a brutal mission for both of them, and I don't want them just thrown away. Jack looked at me with question in his eyes, but I ignored him. John looked at me as if I'd said something foreign. Yes, of course, Reverend Brooks. We will provide for whatever they need when they return. We are Survey, and Sun Tzu doesn't let any agent or asset be neglected after their service. I looked at Jack. He looked at me. All right, then, let's get to work, I said. We all turned towards the door when the first said, Reverend, can I talk to you alone for a moment? I turned back around. I could feel Jack hesitate behind me, but heard John say something to him, and they both left. What can I do for you first? The Avatar looked at me, and I was slightly unnerved to have this much of the first personal scrutiny. Do you understand your assignment, Reverend? To find proof of New Harmonist involvement in the Unity government and take out their influence. Yes, that is the basic command. I am also ordering you to do so by any means necessary. Do you understand? I opened my mouth, then shut it again. I could feel the blood drain from my face and my stomach clench. Is that really necessary? I asked quietly. Yes. I swallowed hard. None of my spirits offered any advice, but I could feel them listening. Are you sure? Reverend Brooks, open societies are vulnerable to bad actors who will weaponize society's openness against itself. If I could find an entirely peaceful solution to this problem, I would have set a different plan in motion. This is the situation we find ourselves in now. While my children and I may have human-like personalities, we are not human, and can see much more in the patterns of humanity than you can. Trust me when I say that we have run all possible solutions. I need to know, Reverend, if you can do what is necessary to save humanity, even if it includes killing. To be specific, Ambassador, could you kill in order to meet this end, or order someone else to do so? I looked at the Avatar. You know what I did on Diana. Yes, said the first, and it may require that you use the same solution. It wasn't the solution first, it was a reaction. Yes, Reverend, but it was the right action. They paused. I need to know your answer now, otherwise I will need to find someone else to take your place. I stared at the first, and their Avatar stared back, waiting for an answer. Could I kill the New Harmonists at Unity Hub in order to stop their influence? I didn't know. A strong spirit came into my mind, voice ringing like thunder. You know, my daughter, that you can do this. I asked you to do this to save my children, said a feminine voice. I put my hand to my head to stop the voice's echo, even though I knew it was useless. Papa? I asked. She's bigger than me, granddaughter. You do not dismiss it when she asks you to do something, he said. I took a deep breath. Yes, first. I can do this, I said, resigned. Did you know I would say yes? I asked, with a bit of anger that surprised me. Yes, but you needed to hear the answer for yourself, the first said, and the screen went blank. We settled into the work in earnest. Compared to Unity law, survey law was much simpler. There were codified written laws, but most of them came down to the AIs have the final say. I can only really think that this aspect of survey must really piss off the Unity diplomats, especially since the AIs are more of a legend than reality to them. Part of me felt a perverse sense of satisfaction knowing that I'd have to tell some of those idiots that they had to wait on a decision from a computer. When I mentioned that to First, he laughed. Yes, they do underestimate us in that way. Or they think that our citizens are slaves and try to rescue them. There is even an organization that is dedicated to deprogramming citizens that they rescue. We can usually take our citizens back and send them to Hestia to recover. Hestia? Yes. What Lucifer is to the biological sciences and physical medicine, Hestia is to mental health and education. She also has the best cooking and fiber art schools in Survey. My daughter has a satellite campus on Lightbringer, but then again, Lucifer and Hestia are good friends, and Hestia knows that Lucifer likes to cultivate the best minds regardless of field. She does remind them that they can't hoard all the scientists, though. She was the one to convince them to expand the university, since that way Lucifer can talk to the greatest minds, but not keep them forever. Some say she is the most human of my children. Fascinating, I said. I hope I get to meet her. I'm sure you will, Marcia. Something about that sounded ominous, but I put that in the back of my mind. As Jack and I crammed as much information about Survey and its dealings with Unity into our heads. We also had security training, where Jack and soldiers from Musashi and agents from Sun Tzu went over every possible emergency scenario. Most of that just required Jack, but there were drills where we simulated my capture and incapacitation. It was odd to be the object of that kind of training. It reminded me a lot of my own intelligence training, and I think that some of the agents were surprised how calm I was during the scenarios. If they really knew the cost of that calmness, they wouldn't be surprised. Jack was becoming more and more of an indispensable partner every day, and I was thankful to all my gods that I didn't have to be alone in this mission. At the beginning of our last month at Survey Hub, John called us into a private meeting. "Ah," he said as we walked in, "please come in and close the door. I'm sorry we couldn't have introduced you sooner. Jack, Marcia, I'd like to introduce you to Kyler, who's to be your head secretary. They've been on assignment until just now, but Kyler is one of our best agents working in Unity against the new Harmonists." Kyler stood and bowed with their hands over their heart, which seemed to be a greeting for those who did not wish to be touched. I returned the greeting, as did Jack, and we sat down. Kyler was even shorter than me, but had a presence that made up for their lack of height. They had a shaved head and multiple piercings. I liked them instantly, and something about them reminded me of Jenny. It brought out my urge to protect them at all costs. Jack caught my eye and gave a nod and a smile. He liked them, too. "It's good to meet you, Reverend Brooks, Mr. Kirby. I've been looking forward to meeting you." "Please, call me Marcia, unless we're in a situation where we have to be excessively formal." Kyler smiled and nodded. Jack rolled his eyes. "Oh, please don't call me Mr. Kirby. Jack is fine. I always feel like I've done something wrong if people call me Mr. Kirby." I laughed, although I think some of the AIs do it just to yank his chain. Jack gave a long-suffering sigh, and Kyler laughed again. "Well, Jack, Marcia, I will acquiesce to your requests," they said, then turned to John. Now that the introductions are over, to business," John said. "Jack, Kyler is your secondary backup. Your primary backup will meet you at Hades, the ambassadorial station. Rest assured that all the agents assigned to you have extensive martial arts training and security skills, although I think you should run some of the abduction drills together again before you leave." He paused. "Universe willing, this is all overkill, but we're not going to take any chances." Jack nodded sagely. I thought it was overkill, but given how good at blending in most of the high-level loyal sons were, and what happened on station, I gave in to my protector's worries. Kyler nodded decisively. "Kyler is also a very efficient intelligence analyst and computer programmer, so between the two of you, you'll be able to do any of the covert computer work needed by Marcia, along with the usual secretarial duties. Any questions?" "Not right now," I answered. John rose from his seat. "Great. Well, I'll let you all get acquainted." The agent left the room, closing the door. "So," Kyler said, "we're going to finally start taking down these New Harmony assholes now." "Excellent," they said, with a feral grin on their face. It seemed to me there was something personal about their enthusiasm. They looked me in the eye. "Then let's get to work, shall we?" Chapter 32. Jenny. The car jostled us as it trundled away from the Marsden estate. I sat demurely in the seat next to Beth. Mark and Lord Marsden, who sat across from us, discussed final arrangements for our trip to the capital. Beth being in the car with us wasn't unusual for upper-class women, as women like me were expected to have a personal maid as a companion. She was able to sit even more still than I could, and I wished I had her way of staying calm no matter what. I didn't think I was hiding my terror. I didn't think I was hiding my terror well at all. The last 3 months had been the hardest of my life, trying to become the perfect New Harmony upper-class lady. Beth had managed to train me in how a lady of my standing should behave, and I hoped I'd do her teaching justice. Or better yet, free this world and make it so no one would have to follow these rules again. I was grateful for Beth's calm presence in the car as the men talked. The slaves and hired help had already moved into the townhouse in the capital the month before to get it ready for its master and lady to move in after the nuptials. The wedding, small though legal, had happened 2 days ago and was the final test for me and Mark. Lord Marsden invited the neighbors, as custom demanded. It was terrifying, but as I hadn't heard anything from Lord Marsden, I assumed I must have passed the test. I heard the tone of the conversation change and looked up. "Old Lady Harper seemed to take a shine to you at the wedding reception," Lord Marsden said. "She mentioned to me what a nice young lady you were, and that a strapping girl like you should give me many grandchildren." He smiled. I blushed. Yes, she was a funny old lady. She asked if I had any sisters. We all laughed at that. "Lady Harper would," the older man said. "She's had 10 sons, and I think her youngest are still bachelors." Oh my, I could understand why she was disappointed when I told her my family had all passed away in the Carroll Parish flood when I was little. The Lord nodded, approving of my answer. We were being careful how we talked in the car, as the driver was hired from an outside company. This, too, was a test of how well our training had worked. So far, the driver seemed to take us for what we appeared to be, a young couple being taken to the train station by their father to see them off to the big city. The amber fields and rolling hills gave way to clusters of buildings full of small working-class flats. The trees were still short and far apart, as the fertile area of the continent was mostly flat plains. Phelpstown was small compared to the capital, but it was still a thriving manufacturing and trade town. I marveled at how antiquated things were compared to the Unity colonies. I was hoping that my gaping at the town gave me the country cousin look that we were going for. At least the awe at such low tech wasn't something I had to fake. The driver turned off the main highway into an underground car park. There were rows of other hired cars and a group of porters standing near the bank of elevators. The porters were dressed in crisply ironed uniforms of black trimmed with red, and the gold doors made it obvious that this was the upper caste entrance. The driver opened the doors, and the men exited the car before Beth and I did. Mark carried a leather briefcase, while Beth carried a smaller tote bag full of the necessities of a lady of my status would need. The trip to the city was only 8 hours long, but it still necessitated toiletries, apparently. I was used to the extra feminine work I had to do to maintain appearances by now, but it still chafed. It was a kind of weird cognitive dissonance. On one hand, I loved being seen as a woman and feeling pretty, but on the other hand, this wasn't by my own choice. It was as much of a prison as the slave collars were. It was horrible when I realized that slaves actually did have collars. About a month into our training at Lord Marsden's house, I realized that Beth always wore the same short necklace all the time. It was a large, heavy silver chain with a purple jewel in the middle. I thought it was some sort of jewelry at first, but I had never seen her wear any other kind of ornament. "That's a nice necklace, Beth," I said to her one day as she was sorting my laundry. Beth just looked at me, then continued folding my clothes. At first I was confused. Why did she just look at me? When I really thought about it, though, I sat on the bed. That's not a necklace, is it? I felt like an idiot for not realizing it sooner. No, mistress. I swore. I'm sorry, Beth. The other woman shook her head. I was remiss in not telling you, since I thought you knew what it was, she said. For regular slaves, it's electronically locked, so we can't remove it ourselves, and contains a microchip to track our movements. They will take it off in the hospital if it impedes receiving medical care, but that's it. House slaves get ones that look like mine, usually with a stone in the house colors. Slaves who work in areas where a collar won't be dangerous will have plain stainless steel chains with a piece of colored enamel on the lock. For those in harder jobs, where any kind of loose jewelry would be hazardous, they usually inject a microchip or use an ankle bracelet. Depends on what they do. I nodded and let her be for a while after that, thinking about what that meant. Half the time, you didn't see the collars, depending on what the slave wore. But all of Lord Martin's slaves, and now ours, had the purple house gem or enamel on their collars. The porters at the train station had collars with the train company's logo on them, and the driver had one with the car hire company's logo. It disgusted me that something so base should be made ornamental. I followed the men to the lifts, while Beth followed me. The lifts opened up onto a platform where other upper-class patrons were waiting. The platform was not at all crowded. I could hear noise from further down the tracks, but there was a wall between the upper-class sections and the lower-class cars. The porters left to stow our luggage. The last porter waited a respectful distance to allow us to say our goodbyes. Well, my children, I wish you a good journey to Owentown. If there's anything that is unsatisfactory, let me know, and we'll sort you out. He held out a hand to Mark. Good luck, my son. May God guide you. Mark took his hand and shook it. Thank you, sir. I'll do my best. And you too, my daughter. I curtsied in response. Lord Martin nodded crisply and then went back to the lifts. If you please, master, lady, this way to your compartment. The porter motioned towards the train. Mark took a deep breath, then held out his elbow for me. I took it, being careful not to look him in the eyes, and we boarded the train. The train ride was strangely relaxing. We had a cabin all to ourselves, just like all the upper-class people who had boarded the train. I noticed, though, when Beth escorted me to the women's bathroom, that there weren't many cabins with people in them. I wondered what the second and third class cabins were like. I tried to remember to ask Beth later. The countryside gave way to suburbs after a while, and I could see nicer townhouses from the train. As soon as the train got close to one of the stations, there were walls on either side of the tracks. Unlike cities on other planets, the walls were painfully clean. No rainwear, not even tall grass at the bottom, and definitely no graffiti anywhere, which to someone from the New York colony was really strange, and brought home that this was definitely not Unity space. At noon, a slave brought us our lunch, setting it on the table that folded up from underneath the window. The man was efficient, but only set out a table setting for two. I looked at Mark, and he shook his head slightly. I swallowed my question. The slave, perhaps seeing my expression, stated, Master and mistress, your maid can lunch in the slave dining car if she would like. Mark nodded. Yes, that would be acceptable. Beth, you may go. Beth stood up. Thank you, sir, she said, and left. The slave finished setting out the lunch, which actually looked really good, and closed the door to our cabin. The slave remained outside the door to attend to our needs, since Beth wasn't there. The lunch was as good as it looked, chicken and some sort of sauce with vegetables. It surprised me, too, since even when I was still somewhat in my father's good graces, travel food wasn't this good. Wow, I didn't expect the food to be this good on the train, I said. Mark took a sip of water and nodded. It's even better than it used to be, if I'm remembering correctly, but a lot can happen in 10 years, and it looks like things have gotten a lot more segregated. I looked thoughtful for a moment. This is almost too opulent, even for Owenites. Maybe the merchants have had more of an influence on the clergy than they used to? All upper classes have their vices, I say quietly. They're usually more of a do what I say, not what I do kind of crowd. The most straight-laced looking families on New York Colony were some of the most abusive and depraved in private. He looked at me, trying to decide whether to ask me the question or not. I saved him the trouble. Yes, including mine. Very much so. Mark gazed at me with a combination of worry, sadness, and a little anger. You haven't talked much about your family. Put down my fork and knife. I probably shouldn't talk about it much here. Mark nodded and took my hand across the table. I could see his love for me in his eyes. I teared up a little. We hadn't been together all that long, but it was amazing to have someone really love me for myself. I knew then that I didn't want to be with anyone else, and if nothing else, our marriage on this godforsaken planet at least wasn't a sham. I came to a decision. I want to have children with you, I blurted out. Mark widened his eyes in shock. Really? I mean, can we? Sister Amy said Survey's doctors can help us, and that they do it all the time for couples like us. When we finish this and go home, I want to try. He opened his mouth and closed it again and cleared his throat. Yes, me, Dad. That would be awesome. Yes. He was so adorable at that moment, all flustered. The idea of us being parents made me happy, at least for this moment. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze and then returned to my lunch. I want this, Jenny, and you've just given me a reason to get through this, Mark said seriously. I love you. We'll get through this, we'll go home, and have all the kids we can handle, right? Yes, we will, I said, determined. But there was a shadow behind Mark's eyes, and it felt like he was trying to convince himself just as much as me. I watched him while he returned to his own lunch. I loved him so much, but there's so much we didn't know about each other's past yet. I wondered how much of that would come back to haunt us both. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me in my writing, there are many ways to do it. Share this podcast, follow me on my Twitch channel, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revginapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.